Hey guys, welcome to Braddels Gaming and to another episode of the Far Cry 5 custom map series. A series on this channel where I show you the maps that I have made on the Far Cry 5 map editor. Following on from 2023, there are a couple things to note about this series. But rather than take up the time we have for today's map breakdown video, be sure to check out the video description if you'd like a quick recap on this series. Now for those of you that watched the previous map breakdown video on Gondola, which was a European inspired map, you'll be pleased to know that the map we're looking at today has also been inspired by the European continent. This is Courtyards, a multiplayer map that, like Gondola, has also been set in a touristy, pedestrian-friendly European setting. Courtyards is a map that also went on a long hiatus for quite some time before I went back and rejuvenated it. When I first started building Courtyards, it was March of 2020. During this time, I hadn't yet returned to Gondola to finish it off, given the issues I was facing with that build. And if you want to learn more about the issues with Gondola, definitely check out the map breakdown video for Gondola as well, if you haven't yet already. But otherwise, the issues I was facing with Gondola at the time prompted me to begin a new European-based map altogether. But like with Gondola, I also ran into a major issue with Courtyards, a setback of the map's design that would also see this map face a lengthy stint on the sidelines, so to speak. In March 2020, I spent about 8 hours working on the map before realizing the extent of the map's design flaws. But rather than persist through the map's flaws, I made the assumption at the time that European-based maps must just not be for me. So, as you do when you run into a pickle, I decided to sweep the problem under the carpet and come back to it when I was ready to do so. Now, that might not be the best life advice, but for map editing, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing to do. Fast forward to mid-2022, and for whatever reason, I decided it was time to fix Courtyards, having experimented with a potential solution in my head that I thought at the time could fix the map's main design flaw. And so the original concept for Courtyards in 2020 was to have 3 fairly uniform courtyards, all interconnected with each other, with each courtyard providing its own character and built form. I never actually changed the built form of these courtyards from 2020, as I really loved the way I styled each courtyard with its own personality. Regardless, I don't think changing what was in the courtyards was so much the issue. More so, I think the size of the map was far too small and confined, amongst some other issues I was experiencing, which I'll explain about now. So as I said, the original concept for Courtyards was just to have these 3 courtyards, all with their own different character, their personality, their built form, interconnected with each other. And there is a great asset in the Assassin's Creed Unity section of the map editor, and they're called these Tombstone Crypt 03s, and you can combine them together to create these really awesome kind of, I wouldn't call them tunnels, but yeah, they're just like a really useful asset. And as you can see, this is what essentially connected all the courtyards together in a very seamless kind of way. And so, like I said, initially the map's design was just these 3 courtyards from the edge of this pavement here all the way to the edge of this pavement right here. And so that was basically all the map was. But this was far too confined, and like I said, I didn't really want to change what was in each courtyard because I really did like that each courtyard has its own personality. You've got kind of a nice little, I guess, pocket park here. You've got what is an entrance to a hotel with a nice little swimming pool and historical statue sitting perched on top of this kind of podium-like structure. And then you've got a more kind of historical building also set on an elevated kind of podium. And so yeah, again, I didn't really want to change what was in each courtyard. And so I just kind of stopped the build altogether. Little did I know, the most simple solution was the best solution, and that was just to make the map bigger. And so that was basically what I did. I focused on creating flank routes on both sides of the map. So you've got this elevated walkway which comes up the stairs, and there's actually 3 entrances for this elevated walkway across the map. There's this entrance here, which is closer to this team spawn, in kind of what I'm dubbing as the Naval Fish Market District, and that is also another flank. So yeah, but for the time being, I'll focus on the elevated walkway. So you've got one entrance here, you've got the second entrance here, and then you've got the third entrance here, closer to the other team spawn, which is in what I'm dubbing as the performance park, because there is a little stage area, there's some seating for people to enjoy a nice little performance in the park. And so yeah, you've got those different entrances for the elevated position, and so it just adds a little bit of verticality and a bit of interest and a bit of diversity to the map, because you've got a completely different section of the map. So the map isn't just courtyards anymore, it's a little bit beyond just the courtyards, but the courtyards were the original concept of the map and is how I came up with the name, which I know is so original, right? But anyway, moving into the elevated walkway, I decided to put a kind of construction scaffolding here. Again, add a little bit more interest and especially verticality with regards to players being able to use the grapple hook. And one thing I find about this section here is it's actually not immediately obvious. You think that a massive piece of scaffolding elevating itself into the sky with a grapple point would be immediately obvious, but it actually isn't really that obvious. And please forgive the clicking in the background. I am doing a live commentary at the moment, so you might notice a bit of stuttering in the commentary and also the controller noises in the background. But I have heard a lot of people don't seem to mind the controller noises that well, and that's really good because I'd have no idea how to edit that out of the video. My editing software isn't really the most advanced, so I'm not always able to create super clear, crisp audio. But I do have a pretty good microphone, a pretty good studio grade microphone, so hopefully that does sort out most of the issues in terms of I guess audio, but again, I don't think it's anything too bad. But back to the point about this scaffolding, and that is that the indicator does help you see that there is a grapple point here, but I feel like a lot of people, especially when they come around this corner, are probably just going to run straight past it because their eye line, their eye level, where their eye is, they're not really focusing on what's above, they're focusing on what's straight ahead. And so it's not actually immediately obvious. So the person that can use this grapple point to the maximum effect and are able to actually see it, the person that, like it with any map, is a little bit more explorative with the map they're playing, is probably going to find some extra elevated positions that is going to give them a little bit more of an edge, a little bit more of an advantage over the enemy players. And so yeah, that is a nice little vantage point there. And I'll hop back into the map editor view, so it's just a little bit easier for us to traverse through the map and a little bit quicker as well. So you come through what is essentially a corner here, and again, that's just to break up a bit of the sightline of the map, because one thing I do have to mention is that in the center of the map back here where the courtyards are, a lot of the sightlines from here all the way to here are quite medium to long in their range in terms of the sightline. So I feel like medium to long range type of gameplay is definitely going to suit this part of the map a lot more. But then coming up to the elevated position up here, it's definitely a lot more short to medium ranged engagements, especially because you've got these corners that kind of truncate around the built environment. And so if we come back into explore mode, we can see just that once the map loads. So yeah, you've got these corners here, again, just to provide a little bit more variety, so that when players come up here, they're experiencing something a little bit different from what is down below. And then yeah, you've got like this nice little courtyard area with a bit of a crypt going on here, some nice flowers, and I guess some more historical statues. And these kind of areas up here kind of just act as additional spawn points. Now, the thing is that this map has been designed for team deathmatch, but the great thing about this map, I think, is that it is pretty open and flexible for me to be able to convert it into a deathmatch map as well. And funnily enough, I actually think that this map is definitely going to be a lot better in deathmatch. I think it's going to play a lot better in deathmatch because in deathmatch you get to find 11 other players, so it's a lot easier to find enemy players than team deathmatch where there's only 6 of them, that being the enemies on the other team. And yeah, so as we saw, this was the entrance I showed you earlier, and so it kind of just wraps around the entire side of the map, that elevated position. Then you come into kind of like the little park area, and this is where there's a little bit more, I guess, natural foliage for players to hide behind, but I feel like this is more of a detail of the map, a bit more of an aesthetic part of the map. You can definitely still fight in here, but it's a pretty small confined part of the map, and so I don't really think it's going to see that much action, but nonetheless I do like the way I've kind of styled it a little differently. Again, give it a little bit of a different personality. And so what I was talking earlier about the sightlines is that, as you can see, there is still a lot of long sightlines, and that was the other issue I was kind of facing when I was building this map to begin with. So I'll just go back into the map editor view again. So with these assets, the tombstone crypts, they're really good assets, as I was saying before, to connect the map together and to kind of form this courtyard type environment. And you know, they're also very European, which is obviously the style that I'm trying to go for as well. But the problem with them is that when you connect them together, they create these really long winding sightlines, which means that it's kind of unattractive. I mean, I actually kind of like the symmetry with these designs, how they're all interconnected with each other. But the problem with them as well is that they're too narrow for me to place like physical cover in them without blocking the player's path. So I have actually put some physical blockers here to break it up, because if these two physical blockers weren't here, then you could basically see from one side of the map to the other, which would just create a bit of a tricky situation in terms of balancing, especially if someone on one team is a bloody dead-eyed person with a sniper, I don't know. So yeah, those blockers just break up the sightlines a bit, but as you'll note, there is still some very lengthy sightlines on the map, and that might be a particular issue. I know that this map definitely wouldn't pass game developer standard for a multiplayer map because the sightlines are so long, and I've tried my best to try and break them up with some different kind of objects here, especially like this statue, but as you can see, it's still a pretty long sightline. But to be honest, I'm not actually that annoyed about this issue, because I feel like having a map, especially in Far Cry, which is quite open and exposed, isn't always the worst thing. And even then, I actually think that even though there are these really long sightlines, I mean, look at this one here, there is still a lot of cover on the map for players to duck behind. So it's literally going to take 1 second for a player to strafe left or right, and they're basically in cover. So even though they're really exposed out in this kind of area of the map and they're getting shot at, they can easily just move to the left or to the right in 1 second and they're behind cover. So it is a bit of an issue, but I don't think it's necessarily the biggest issue. It's not like everything is super open and exposed. And I don't mind it being open and exposed even then, because it does allow players to freely move throughout the map. And one thing that I guess I am proud about this map is that I think I've detailed it really nicely without over cluttering the space and making it pretty claustrophobic and hard for players to move through. So it still allows for players to move through the environment pretty freely without being impeded, but there is enough detail here to suggest that this is a really lived in kind of urban environment. And one other issue that I was kind of debating about, and this is only something that I edited in just the last couple days before making this video, is all this rubbish that I've placed on the floor throughout the map. And basically when I first started building this map, it isn't based on a particular location that I've been to in real life, but when I went to Europe in 2018, I wanted to build a European map or a couple European maps in the Far Cry arcade. And like I said, I had issues with Gondola to get that map out. And then I had issues with this map as well. But if I'm being honest, I think that this map is definitely stronger than Gondola in terms of its built form and aesthetic, and utilizing European architecture and kind of pedestrian friendly environments a lot better than what Gondola was. And so in saying that, a lot of this map was kind of based on my experiences when I visited Europe in 2018. But one thing I did notice when I was in Europe is that the environments, at least the ones that I went to, were very clean. The urban environments themselves even though they had lots and lots of people walking through them, were very clean. And so you wouldn't actually really see piles of rubbish like this around. But as a map editor, I feel like if I didn't have these piles of rubbish lying around, my map would look very barren and very bare, and it probably wouldn't look very appealing to the naked eye. And so I decided to just add a considerable amount of rubbish around the map, but not like a super huge amount, just trying to really balance that out. Particularly in this fish market area, I did actually add a lot more debris and rubbish because I thought that in an environment like this where it's a little bit more hardworking, the conditions might be a little dirtier, so to speak. But again, I didn't really put that much rubbish in the map because, at least based on my experience when I was in Europe, I found everything to be really clean, which is really good. But I just felt as a map editor, I couldn't really do that necessarily, like just leave the pavements completely clean, because then I didn't feel like I'd really be making necessarily the best map from a detail perspective. So yeah, it was a really kind of interesting debate that I was having in the last couple of days when I was putting in all this rubbish on the floor. I especially like these kind of flower petal assets actually, because there are flowers that I've kind of placed nearby and throughout the map. And yeah, I kind of like that they are there. They kind of have a little bit of a realistic kind of texture to them. And I also place a lot of them outside of the crypt, almost like this has recently been the place of a wedding, or yeah, probably a wedding, not so much a funeral. I don't think people are really spreading flowers for people when they die. I mean, they're definitely putting flowers on their grave, but I don't think people are spreading petals of flowers everywhere. That's definitely more of a wedding thing, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, anyway, moving on with the rest of the map. So I feel like I've talked about this elevator section pretty well. You got a nice little food and beverage district here. One thing that I noticed in Europe, and one thing that is pretty commonplace in Europe, is that there's just a lot of eateries everywhere, especially in these pedestrian environments. There's just a lot of tables and chairs around for people to sit and socialize at. So that's another kind of key thing I brought into this map. But also I felt like I needed to put those chairs and tables there, because if I didn't have them there, the map again was just going to look really barren and devoid of any kind of detail. And I've also got some balconies that protrude out from the buildings as well that I added. You can't really get up there, but again, it's just to add a little bit more detail and a little bit more depth to the map and try and make it a little bit more realistic, I suppose. Now coming back over to the naval side of the map, where the fish markets are, this is another flank that I added, and that's why I said that in Team Deathmatch I don't necessarily know how well this map is going to play, because in trying to reduce the map's confinement to just these 3 courtyards, I expanded the map outwards in over this way and over that way, but I might have actually expanded it too big actually. So I don't really know how it's going to play until I actually publish this inside the Far Cry Arcade and actually play it with real players. But at least from what I've kind of thought about over the last few days, I might have actually made the map too big now. But again, I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing. I think it'll still perform pretty well in Team Deathmatch. And like I said earlier, I'm going to put this in Deathmatch as well. And honestly, I think Deathmatch is going to be a much more popular and a much more freer and better way that this map plays. But again, I don't know. I'm just going to have to wait until I actually test it inside the Far Cry Arcade. But yeah, that's something I'm really looking forward to. Moving on though to the naval district, the fish market district. I briefly touched on it before in terms of putting all the debris and rubbish in this kind of precinct just to make it look a little bit more working class, I suppose. But yeah, essentially you have a fish market. Man, I keep repeating myself. That's always a commonplace with these live commentaries. And then I've also got these boathouses, which purely act as relief spawns, because I imagine, well, I've actually tested it. The time that it takes for someone to run from the initial spawn of Team 1 to the initial spawn of Team 2 is about 20 seconds if they're full tilt sprinting. So that means that players are probably going to meet each other about this part of the map I've kind of tested. So yeah, it just means that essentially I feel like there might be a bit of spawn trapping going on here. So the relief spawns are going to be in the elevated walkway over there and in the boathouses over here, just to allow relief spawning so that one team isn't spawn killing the other team and causing a bit of an imbalance issue. But yeah, back to the naval section, you've got kind of like a, I guess like a, I wouldn't call it a cruise or a ferry terminal because obviously that would be a lot more massive. But you've got kind of like these, I guess, gondola rides, kind of throwing it back to Gondola. But unlike Gondola, I've actually made a proper canal this time that kind of goes throughout the entire city, because Gondola was very confined to just one little precinct, at least the body of water that is, that I'm talking about in Gondola. But the canal on this map actually extends way into the city. And even though that's out of the map limits, it still kind of provides that idea that this is part of a much larger city in Europe. And yeah. So yeah, you've got kind of like boat rides. And again, this part of the map isn't really accessible, but again, as I talk about in every one of my videos, I try to make the environments outside the playable areas feel like everything is part of a larger world to really increase that immersion for the player. So you've got boat houses on this side of the canal as well. You've got kind of like some storage areas. Don't mind the lack of terrain paint textures here, because again, players who are actually in the map's playable area aren't really going to see that. So you only really need to detail what is important, what they can actually see. You've got kind of like a nice little navy park here, or naval park, a park on the canal for the children and for families to gather. And again, a nice little storage area. And then you've got kind of like what is essentially the big naval historical district of this map's environment. So you've got like kind of like the massive bridge, the massive church, you know, the naval facilities and things like that. But yeah, essentially you've got a very narrow flanking route here, which again is just a little bit different to what the courtyards are like, which is a lot more medium long range engagements, as opposed to over here, which is a lot more closer ranged engagements, especially around the boathouses and along the water itself. So yeah, really just trying to provide a lot of different play styles for different players to use, because obviously everyone is going to play the map in a different way based on how they like to play first person shooters. So I really tried to accommodate that with this entire map. And yeah, that basically sums up the map breakdown for Courtyards. Again, it's really hard to kind of break down everything in the map in these extended tour type of videos. That's why I'm definitely transitioning more towards making speed build commentaries. But as I said, any map that, you know, I start building before 2023, or I haven't actually said it in this video yet, but any map that I start building before 2023 comes to you as a map breakdown video, and any map that I started building in 2023 and beyond comes to you in the form of a speed build commentary. And I like speed build commentaries a little bit more because even though they're a lot longer, they allow me to actually break down the map entirely, rather as these map breakdown videos don't really allow me to do that. So there are still some things that I would like to talk about, but I don't necessarily want these videos to become super long-winded discussions and breakdowns into my map, because it is just me walking around the same map about 10 times as I'm doing right now and talking about the map, which I don't think is as engaging, but nonetheless, I don't mind it. And yeah, I think it just is a good way to kind of diversify the content, to show you the old format for map breakdowns and then also the new format of map breakdowns based on when I actually created the map itself. But that wraps up the map breakdown video for Courtyards, another map that I never foresaw coming to the channel, especially after putting it on hold for quite a lengthy amount of time from March 2020 to mid 2022. But really glad to have decided to go back and fix it by coming up with what I think should be a good solution to the map's prior design flaws. Looking forward to getting this one up on the Far Cry Arcade to truly test the effectiveness of the map's extensions, such as the Fish Market, Naval District flank, and the Elevated Walkway flank, in overcoming the initial design flaws of the map feeling a little bit too small and confined. And after I test the map with real players in the Far Cry Arcade, I will jot down all my observations of how the map plays, and all these observations will then arrive in the gameplay breakdown video to follow. Which I actually don't really know when it's going to come out. I always feel it's pretty hard to capture gameplay in this day and age, especially when Far Cry multiplayer just isn't really that popular. But I'm still committed to getting those gameplay breakdown videos out. It's just that they're going to take a lot more longer now than they would have taken a few years ago, I feel like. But when I am able to get gameplay, I definitely will share with you guys a gameplay breakdown video, which will be a follow-up to this video to evaluate if my predictions for how this map would play is going to be right and what other observations I kind of have for the map and its gameplay. But until then, I hope you guys enjoyed today's map breakdown on Courtyards. If you did, please like the video and comment your thoughts about the map below. And if you're not yet subscribed but want to see more awesome Far Cry content, then be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified when new Far Cry content comes out. I'm Braddels Gaming, thank you all for watching and your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one. And as always, have a great day.